Hey there everyone. Today I'd like to discuss Walter Benjamin's essay, The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction. This seminal essay in media studies shows how the shifting conditions of historical, cultural, and technological reproduction not only change our relationship to art, but its identity as an aesthetic object itself. He's going to discuss how the so-called aura of a work of art is effectively stripped in the act of mechanical reproduction, turning it into a commodifiable flat surface that can be freely proliferated. Key for Benjamin in this essay is discussing the authority and authenticity of the original work of art, and how this is called into question with its ability to be reproduced with greater and greater fidelity. He says, even the most perfect reproduction of a work of art is lacking in one element: its presence in time and space, its unique existence at the place where it happens to be. He furthermore says, the presence of the original is the prerequisite to the concept of authenticity. So, right, you can go to the Louvre right now and you can see the original Mona Lisa adorned there on the wall. That is the authentic work of art present, and it has all of the history in which it was created kind of imbued within it, right? We can learn facts about it, and when we refer to the Mona Lisa and when we look at the Mona Lisa, we can recall that historical context, we can recall the artist, we can recall perhaps the intention behind the artwork. All of that is there in the authentic work of art. And Benjamin sees that as being potentially called into question when it is mechanically reproduced. Because he says that the authenticity of a thing is the essence of all that is transmissible from its beginning, ranging from its substantive duration, so its presence for a certain amount of time through a particular history, to the history which it has experienced, so the time through which it has lived, the sort of marks that it has had to bear as a result. Since the historical testimony rests on the authenticity, the former, too, is jeopardized by reproduction when substantive duration ceases to matter. And what is really jeopardized when the historical testimony is affected is the authority of the object. And this is important, right? When we're trying to figure out, okay, what did James Joyce really mean in Ulysses? Or, what did some artist mean with their original work of art? Whatever it may be. We like to try to go back to the original and figure out, okay, beyond all the errors that it has occurred over time in the process of coming to us as the consumer, we want to try to go back to the original and locate the authority of authorial intention of the object in its materiality and its originality, try to find some sort of, urtext, so to speak, some sort of original from which we can glean our most authentic interpretation. But Benjamin says that as soon as we can mechanically reproduce an object, it becomes a lot more difficult to reach that original because we have to go through so many more steps to reach that, and potentially we risk effacing the original, covering it up with so many iterations that it becomes unclear what makes the original, what makes it so much better than a copy. He says one might subsume the eliminated element in the term aura in German, and go on to say, that which withers in the age of mechanical reproduction is the aura of the work of art. He says that the technique of reproduction detaches the reproduced object from the domain of tradition. By making many reproductions, it substitutes a plurality of copies for unique existence. And this is going to coincide with a number of changes in the way that we approach the work of art, namely that we shift from quality to quantity, because it no longer necessarily matters the original intent or value of the aura of the original work of art, of its presence and its ability to be firmly located solely within one space. It has to be expanded universally into a number of spaces. And this coincides with the universalizing impulse that Benjamin sees as part and parcel of the Enlightenment, right? We want to have universal human rights, universal accessibility to literacy and things like this. But the work of art doesn't respond to this universalizing message so well. Because what marks the work of art is, for example, its origin in ritual value for Benjamin. Because if we think of, for example, certain religious architecture, it coincides with its ritual function, with its ability to house rituals and itself to be involved in that ritual. And what happens when, for example, you have the Kaaba in Mecca, and you can look up on YouTube right now a 24-hour feed of the Kaaba, and you can just see people, walking around it and doing certain things to it. It loses a bit of that aura. It loses the purpose of the Hajj, is to go see the Kaaba in person, because going in person not only is symbolic, but you're actually, getting close to this architectural structure that is imbued with some sort of special purpose by God. But what happens when one can just pull that up on one's phone? It certainly gives one pause. He says, the existence of the work of art with reference to its aura is never entirely separated from its ritual function. In other words, the unique value of the authentic work of art has its basis in ritual, the location of its original use value. And we could think of this literally as he's meaning it here, that all art originates with its use being a ritual function. But also we could think of this in the modern sense and say that use value is a sort of ritual function. It is a routine within which something makes sense, through which it articulates its purpose, through which it manifests its aura. And this all gets called into question because one of the substantive facts of the aura is it allows one, as a viewer of the work of art, to have a sense of distance, he says. But a problem is that there is the desire of contemporary masses to bring things closer, spatially and humanly, which is just as ardent as their bent towards overcoming the uniqueness of every reality by accepting its reproduction. Every day the urge grows stronger to get hold of an object at very close range by way of its likeness, its reproduction. In other words, we get satisfied with the copy because it suits our needs to take the object of art out of its original ritual function and be satisfied with our version, our distortion of the work of art. He says, to pry an object from its shell, to destroy its aura, is the mark of a perception whose sense of the universal equality of things has increased to such a degree that it extracts it, even from a unique object, by means of reproduction. Right? The notion of uniqueness kind of goes out the gate. One of my favorite examples of this is the Library of Babel. This is an online library in which you can search any 3,200 character or less phrase, and you will be referred to a page of random text, randomly generated text within this online library, where you have an exact statement of whatever phrase you typed already located in the library before you said it. And this really calls into question the notion of originality, because I, for example, have showed this to various people in my life, and sometimes I'm met with vitriolic opposition. That no, I insist that I was being original when I came up with this idea. But we might ask, if original means new, means to come on the scene first, then this is resolutely a defeater of originality, in a sense. It was already there in the system, and it was located. And through these technological means, we can take even the most random sequences and turn them into something meaningful. So this is, of course, going to bear on the relationship of meaning to information, which is something that a later media theorist, Jean Baudrillard, is very key on. For him, meaning is entirely antithetical to information. Information, as it increases, directly destroys meaning through saturation. And Benjamin says, mechanical reproduction emancipates the work of art from its parasitical dependence on ritual. What does this mean for our relationship to the work of art? Well, it means that the exhibition value, for the first time, shows its superiority to ritual value. No longer is it important, for example, to bring back this example, to go on Hajj, to go on pilgrimage to the Kaaba. Now, it simply is an object of exhibition. It's something that you want to see and you want to know and bring into your grasp that, oh, I know this thing, I know that it exists. It's now somehow more moot whether or not I, as a hypothetical Muslim, go on Hajj. He says, when the age of mechanical reproduction separated art from its basis in cult, the semblance of its autonomy disappeared forever. Because now, the work of art becomes imbued with an economic history of development and proliferation. Now it no longer remains alone a sort of artifact of its original historical circumstances, but it becomes proliferated not in quite the same way that the Mona Lisa just sitting in the Louvre kind of, is in a new time and place now. It's in 2025 right now. But no, we literally create a new version of the work of art, which is instantiated and created in a new context. We sort of destroy the notion of historical authenticity for Benjamin. And in particular, he wants to look at, for example, how the montage effect from the visual arts plays out in film in a way that is the height of artifice for him, which is the ability of film to take a sequence of positional views and manipulate the framing of the aesthetic object through the camera, where we actually embody perspective in a piece of technology. So now technology comes to bear perspective for us. He says the audience's identification with the actor is really an identification with the camera. Consequently, the audience takes the position of the camera. Its approach is that of testing, right? Of probing into things. And we can, for example, give the illusion of consistency and of temporal unity when, in fact, these shots that have come together to produce a film have been taken across days, months, years, perhaps. We can make something composed of many separate performances, splitting the actor's work into a series of mountable episodes. You can see this, for example, parodied in William Burroughs' Naked Lunch. It's a series of vignettes loosely connected, which bring together the disparate nature of art and aesthetics itself in the age of mechanics and technics in its contemporary sense. The illusion of depth is now all the more readily seen as an illusion. The notion of, for example, depth of character is now the effect of an aesthetic object, which can be permeated through mechanical reproduction to a consumer and meet them where they're at. So we lose also a sense of depth as a consumer because now the aesthetic object comes to us. We no longer have to come to it and contemplate it. He says the distinction between author and public is about to lose its basic character. The difference becomes merely functional, and it may vary from case to case. At any moment, the reader is ready to turn into a writer, and vice versa. As expert, which he had to become willy-nilly in an extremely specialized work process, even if only in some minor respect, the reader gains access to authorship. Right? Because of the means by which art is discussed and discovered is so highly disseminated, now people are more literate than they ever have been, more knowledgeable than they ever have been, not necessarily more rational, but more knowledgeable than they ever have been, and as such have more of the specialized capacity necessary to be an artist, to be an author, than they ever have. And one of the interesting things that coincides with this maximization of technology is the ability to create the artifice of not having it. When you watch a movie, you don't get the sense of all the technology going on in the background, all the lighting and the specific camera used to yield you your perspective. Thus, the equipment-free aspect of reality here has become the height of artifice. The sight of immediate reality has become an orchid in the land of technology. A very beautiful and very apt phrase, where we lose the sense of our very reliance on the means by which art is delivered to us. And delivered to us is an important aspect of this, because he says the painting invites the spectator to contemplation. Before it, the spectator can abandon himself to his associations. Before the movie frame, he cannot do so. No sooner has his eye grasped a scene than it has already changed. It cannot be arrested. Duhamel, who detests the film and knows nothing of its significance, though something of its structure, notes the circumstance as follows. I can no longer think what I want to think. My thoughts have been replaced by moving images. The spectator's process of association and view of these images is indeed interrupted by the constant, sudden change. And we can note this in, for example, Paul Virilio's Speed and Politics, or his Aesthetics of Disappearance, where he shows that the consumer themselves becomes a habitable object of circulation, part of a market in which movement and speed is a defining function, where now I become identified with this movable medium, which is the camera, the means by which art is given to me instead of me searching it out. So all of these are some of the important kind of key factors that Benjamin sees as really changing our relationship to art and what art is. Because, for example, with the different technological capabilities of slow motion and of time-lapse, we totally change our relationship to temporality and to perception, because we can perceive things we were never able to perceive before. And now perception becomes intimately tied with technological mediation and artifice in a way where we can more than ever change our relationship to our objects through merely kind of microscopically or macroscopically affecting our relationship to perception. And of course, this is going to affect our relationship to desire, because now we can receive all sorts of new artifice through film that gives the semblance of authentic history, of narrative continuity, of ideological continuity. I think of a lot of the films being produced by the Third Reich, where you have this sense of breadth of scope in the ideology, of an authenticity of gesture that is in fact merely an effect, merely something produced and which can be disseminated to a consumer. A consumer feels that they are being revolutionary, for example, when in actuality they are merely being pandered to, and this is one of the many ways that media studies tries to show the ways in which, as Frederick Jameson puts it, aesthetic and commodity production become wedded as one, such that the aesthetic object now takes on the guise and in fact the very essence of a commodity. It's now concerned with use value, with reproducibility, with efficiency, with the ability to pander to a wide range of consumers instead of being very specialized to one consumer. So all of these are going to be very important, and we see them discussed in this essay. So I think it's a very important one to read, and there are various challenges that have been made to it, but I think it's a fairly prescient analysis of the way that mechanical reproduction affects our relationship not only to art and to its very essence, but to each other in society. That being said, that's it for this lecture. I hope it's been somewhat interesting. You can check out any of my other ones I've done on postmodernism, German idealism, gender theory, post-colonial studies, and other classic literature. You can also become a channel member for $5 a month and gain access to, among other things, a private philosophy Zoom, which I do the second Sunday of every month. You can tailor it to your needs, do whatever needs to be done. I'm here to help. I also have super thanks if you just want to donate one time to the channel, because I really appreciate it. It helps me, buy some of the many books necessary to get this content to y'all, but no pressure. That's it for this lecture, and I will see you in another one.